Okay, so let's now work out how to pull down changes from GitHub inside Android Studio. So we're going to make a change to a file in GitHub and then update our local repository in Android Studio to pull down those changes that are in the GitHub repository. Now, as I said in the previous video, it isn't ideal to make changes directly on GitHub, and in real-world scenarios, you wouldn't do that very often. What usually happens is that a team member will contribute the change to GitHub by pushing their local changes up to the GitHub repository. And then some other team member, you in this scenario, pulls down those changes from GitHub to your local repository. So this is one of the simple ways that team collaboration happens. Now, of course, there are different kinds of scenarios in which different workflow happens in team collaboration, but we can discuss this scenario to keep things simple and because this is the most common way of using Git in Android Studio. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and make a change on GitHub, and then we're going to pull that change down to Android Studio. So let's open a browser first and go to GitHub. Then we're going to go to our calculator project, calculator app. And let's just find a file. We're going to perhaps modify the main activity file again. So I'm just going to go into app, source, this folder here. Oops, sorry, wrong one. The main folder, and then it's this Java com timber chalker calculator. All right, so and mainactivity.java is the file we want. So let's modify this file, just make a simple change. I'm going to click on this little pencil here, say edit the file. I can scroll right down to the bottom, and let's just put something down the bottom just so we can easily find it. And we'll put, this is a comment to test the Git pull process from Android Studio. And now that we've made a change, we can actually put the name of the change in there. So we can just say updated a comment in main activity. Java, and noting over here that commit directly to the master branch is specified. We don't want to create a new branch or anything like that. Click on commit changes. So now if we go back to calculator app up here, we see there's now 3 commits. I can click on commit, or the commits option, updated a comment in mainactivity.java, and I can click on that, and we can see the new changes that we've made to mainactivity.java. So in other words, the repository on GitHub has now been updated. All right, so let's swing over and start Android Studio now. And then we're going to open our calculator project, our calculator app, and then we're going to pull down those changes. Give it a moment to start. Okay, and I can just click on the project pane so we can see our project here. And just to confirm, we're going to go into the main activity, right down to the bottom. And we can see we haven't got that comment yet, which is correct because obviously we haven't pulled the change yet. All right, so how do we get those changes into Android Studio from GitHub? Well, we come up to this VCS menu and click on Update Project. Now when we do that, you can see this pop-up comes up on the screen. Now we've got a couple of options here under Update Type. What we're going to select is Merge. Now, merge basically means is a fetch and a merge, and we've already discussed that during the pull with the command line. It's just a type of update, and this will be one that you would typically use when you're working with a GitHub repository. Rebase and branch default is generally ones that you don't really need to worry too much about. Okay, so using stash is something that I do want to talk about, and this is a workflow strategy. Now, if you've got any staged or unstaged changes before pulling the changes from GitHub, then those changes that are currently in your local repository will be hidden away or stashed, so to speak, and then the pull from GitHub, the remote repository, will be completed. And now, if that pull succeeds, then those stashed changes are then restored back into the system. So it's just a way that Git gives you some options here to make it more likely that the changes that are coming down will actually be applied correctly, and then any local changes are then reapplied back to your project after that. This is the most common option that will be used, or that are used, or is used by developers in Android Studio. Now, shelf is basically an IntelliJ IDEA internal operation. It's not actually used very often, so I don't suggest you look at that too much. You can also click on this option here, do not show this dialog in the future. I don't recommend that. If you did that, obviously you wouldn't get these options each time. I think it's good to have these options. It's literally only an extra click to click OK once you've selected them anyway. But if you did want to do that, whatever you've selected here will be used each time, and you won't be prompted for this particular option after you've clicked on selected VCS and update project. So I won't talk too much about rebase or branch default. Keep in mind, if you really want to find out what they're about, bearing in mind they are advanced options that you probably won't use very often, do check out Bibhash's course, because he does go into that into more detail. In this case, what I'm going to do is just click on OK, having merge and stash selected. You can see down the bottom it's actually processing away, and it's given us some information here in the bottom here. You can see now, because I've left the version tab open, updated, mainactivity.java has been updated. Come over to console, we can see what's happened here. The git command that was executed was a fetch and then a merge. I mentioned that's what would happen when we selected the merge. It does a fetch first and then a merge. That's just really the two commands that it's using to pull down that information. Alright, and if you want to see what was actually changed, you can click on log. It actually shows here what's actually changed. It updated a comment in Mainactivity. That's, if you remember, was the commit message that we added in GitHub. And most importantly also, if we come down and have a look, we can see that the comment has now been applied. This is a comment to test the git pull process of Android Studio to our Mainactivity. So in other words, the file has been updated correctly. And if you had made any changes to the files before you proceeded with this update, the stash command would have provided some details here about the actual change, but in this case we hadn't made any changes, so consequently there's no extra message there about that, but that's where you'd actually look for it anyway. Bearing in mind again that the stash command hides any staged or unstaged changes before the pull process actually completes. Now there is an alternative way to do this that achieves the same goal, and that's to come back up to VCS, git, and then pull. And that gives a different screen, but does essentially the same information here. And you can see it's telling us the branch to merge. It's giving us the git root and also the remote git repository. Now there's various strategies that are employed here. You don't really need to worry about those too much. The default strategy is probably you're going to be using that 99 times out of 100. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the advanced options. Again, you've always got the advanced course from Bibhash if you want to find out what some of those are. Let's actually try that. Well, let's do two things. Let's firstly put a comment up here. We'll make a change. We'll pretend that we've added a method here between the on restore instance state and the perform operation. So we're going to put public string tim method. So this is going to be a change that we've introduced to the local file Mainactivity. But then I'm going to go back to our calculator app. And I'm going to go back into the Mainactivity. We're going to add another comment. All right, so Mainactivity, we're going to edit it again. Let's just put a second comment there. Another day, another comment. We're going to put revise the comments. We're going to leave it on to commit directly to the master branch, commit changes. Then we'll come back to calculator app and we should have a fourth commit, which we've got there. Click on revise the comments, which is the description we used for the commit. There's the comment that's been added. All right, so let's go back now to Android Studio. Bearing in mind that we've got this change here. That's a local change to Mainactivity. Let's go ahead now and do VCS git pull, which, as I mentioned, is an alternative way to actually achieve the same thing. And bearing in mind also, you could have also clicked this button down here, which is the same option. You may have noticed that when I actually selected that, VCS git pull, the little icon is there, VCS with the down arrow. So either way, it's going to get you to the same option. So again, I won't talk about the strategies or these other options here. Some of these are self-explanatory. You can sort of just tab over them and have a look. If for some reason you did want to commit the changes to the local repository, you'd select that, add log information. If you want more information, you can see what it's doing there, it's just appending that log parameter option. But again, you probably, 99 times out of 100 won't be using that. But let's go ahead and do a pull now, just to see what happens. Now you can see here that your local changes would be overridden by a merge. Commit, stash, or revert them to proceed. So we can view them, and it's actually going to tell us which file is going to be affected. And if we wanted to, we could come over here and click on that option, and that actually shows us the differences in what's going to happen. You can see the method, that a local method we've added here, and this the second comment is going to be added down the bottom there once it's merged. So what we can do, we can click on OK to that. We haven't changed anything. And what we can do is we can go back to the VCS option, click on Update again. This time I can use Stash, click on OK. You can see down the bottom there, you may have noticed it was stashing and then unstashing the changes. And ignore that message now because that's now going to be fixed. So we've still got our method here, but we've now got a second comment. So you can see how smart it was. It was smart enough to take our file back to the state it was prior to doing the pull. In other words, it removed this local method. It then added this second comment, whatever modifications were made to the file. And then after that, it did the unstash where it put the changes back again. So that's the difference between using those two options. I generally prefer to use just the update project with these options here, because stash is something that Android Studio is doing for us as opposed to necessarily being part of Git. But if you wanted to, you can also go into there and you could just do the regular pull that way. But then you need a bit more of an understanding about the various types of strategies that handle merges and so on and so forth. So I think the way that Android Studio have done it works out quite well. Right, so I'm going to actually delete this. So what I'll do now is I'm going to clean out this change. So I'm just going to right click this file here, click on Git and select Revert. Just that one file. And that's reverted the changes. So what it's actually done is it's removed the local changes or any changes I've made that aren't in the repository. So that's a good way that if you've made a change and you've decided you want to back out the change and go back to the last stable version, the version that was currently in the repository, Revert will do that for you. Okay, so that's how to pull repository code changes from GitHub into your local repository. In the next video, we'll start talking about branching and how to do that in Android Studio. So I'll see you in the next video.